Your soulmate is slowly realizing that losing you would change their life forever, and before you dismiss that as a dramatic thought, pause right here for a moment, because this realization doesn't arrive as panic or desperation, it arrives quietly, almost invisibly, the way truth always does when it's too real to ignore. This isn't about them suddenly missing you because of loneliness or boredom, it's about something deeper settling into their awareness, something they can't unfeel once it lands. Stay with this for a second, because what's happening inside your soulmate right now isn't loud regret, it's recognition. Recognition that your presence in their life was not just emotional comfort, not just familiarity, not just a phase, but a stabilizing force they didn't fully understand until the idea of losing it became real. This realization doesn't strike all at once. It builds slowly, through moments that seem ordinary on the surface but feel heavy underneath. Listen closely, because the first place this realization shows up is not in what they say, but in what suddenly feels different without you. Situations that once felt manageable now feel empty. Decisions that once felt simple now feel heavier. Achievements that once felt exciting now feel strangely incomplete. They are beginning to notice that you were woven into their sense of normal, into their emotional rhythm, into the way they experienced life, and that kind of weaving doesn't unravel without consequence. Don't scroll past this, because your soulmate is not realizing this through nostalgia, they're realizing it through contrast. Contrast between how life felt when your energy was present and how it feels now that it isn't as accessible. They're noticing how conversations feel flatter, how laughter doesn't linger the same way, how silence feels longer instead of restful. These aren't dramatic thoughts, they're subtle observations that accumulate until they form understanding. Stay present, because this understanding is uncomfortable for them. It forces them to confront a truth they avoided for a long time, that they underestimated your impact. Not out of malice, not out of arrogance, but out of emotional complacency. When something is consistently supportive, grounding, and understanding, it can become invisible until it's gone. They're seeing now what they didn't see then. Listen carefully, because your soulmate is also realizing that losing you wouldn't just change their emotional world, it would change who they are. You weren't just someone they cared about, you were someone who mirrored their growth, challenged their patterns, and softened their rough edges. Without you, they're beginning to notice old habits creeping back in, old defenses returning, old versions of themselves resurfacing, and that realization is unsettling. Don't miss this, because this is where the fear begins, not fear of being alone, but fear of regression. Fear of becoming someone they worked hard to outgrow. Fear of losing the version of themselves that only existed because you believed in it, nurtured it, or made space for it. That kind of fear doesn't scream. It sits quietly and asks hard questions. Stay with this, because your soulmate is replaying moments now, not to romanticize the past, but to understand it. They're remembering how you responded when they were overwhelmed, how you listened without fixing, how you stayed present without controlling. These memories are not nostalgic highlights, they're benchmarks, standards they now realize are rare. Listen closely, because they're also noticing how difficult it is to replace what you brought into their life. Not replace you as a person, but replace the feeling of being understood without explanation, supported without pressure, accepted without performance. They may try distractions, new routines, new people, but nothing fits the same way, and that mismatch is teaching them something important. Don't scroll yet, because here's a truth they're beginning to face: losing you wouldn't just be an emotional loss, it would be a directional one. You weren't just part of their life, you were part of their forward momentum. You encouraged growth even when you didn't push. You reflected truth even when it was uncomfortable. Without that influence, they feel less anchored. Stay present, because this realization is not immediate clarity, it's gradual discomfort. Discomfort when they catch themselves wanting to share something with you and realizing they can't. Discomfort when they make a decision and wish they could hear your perspective. Discomfort when they recognize that the person they trusted most with their inner world is no longer as reachable. Listen carefully, because this discomfort is doing something powerful, it's breaking their emotional autopilot. For a long time, they operated under the assumption that you would always be there in some form, that access to you was stable, that your patience was endless. That assumption is dissolving now, and with it, complacency. Don't miss this part, because your soulmate is also beginning to understand the difference between love that is available and love that is chosen. You chose them in ways they didn't always reciprocate consciously. Now they're realizing that choice is not guaranteed, and that realization changes how value is perceived. Stay with this, because this is where accountability starts to form. Not guilt, not self-blame, but responsibility. Responsibility for moments they took for granted. Responsibility for silence that spoke louder than they intended. Responsibility for assuming you'd always adapt, always wait, always understand. Listen closely, because this responsibility doesn't yet know what to do with itself. It hasn't turned into action, but it has turned into awareness. Awareness that they were living with the benefits of your presence without fully honoring the cost of losing it. Don't scroll away, because the most important realization is this. Your soulmate is starting to see that losing you wouldn't just change their life externally, it would change their inner stability. You were part of their emotional regulation, their sense of safety, their ability to face uncertainty without spiraling. Without you, they feel less balanced, even if they can't articulate why. Stay present, because this realization is forcing them to ask a question they avoided: what did I assume would always be there? And when they answer honestly, your name surfaces, not as possession, but as influence. Listen carefully now, because this is not the moment of action yet, it's the moment of reckoning. Reckoning with the fact that some people don't just add happiness, they add coherence. They help life make sense. Losing that doesn't create immediate chaos, but it creates a slow unraveling that's impossible to ignore. Don't miss this, because your soulmate is also noticing how much you changed for the better by stepping back. They see your strength, your boundaries, your clarity, and it's making them realize that you were never dependent on them, you were choosing them. That distinction is humbling. Stay with this, because this realization is reshaping how they see the past and the future. The past no longer looks like something that just happened, it looks like something they participated in. And the future no longer looks open-ended, it looks conditional on the choices they make now. Listen closely, because this is the quiet beginning of truth. Truth that says, losing this person wouldn't just hurt, it would alter the course of my life. And once that truth is felt, it cannot be unfelt. Don't scroll away, because this is only the first stage. Awareness always comes before action. Realization always comes before courage. And your soulmate has just begun to realize what your absence would actually mean. This is not about regret yet. This is about understanding. And understanding is the moment everything starts to change. Before you think this realization will suddenly push them into dramatic action, slow down and stay with this moment, because what your soulmate is moving through now is not urgency, it's gravity. Gravity doesn't rush. It pulls steadily, inevitably, and that's exactly how the truth about losing you is settling into their life. This stage is quieter than regret and deeper than longing. It's the stage where consequences become emotionally real instead of abstract. Stay present, because your soulmate is beginning to notice that your absence isn't loud, but it's constant. It shows up in the smallest spaces. In the pause before they share good news. In the hesitation when something goes wrong and they instinctively reach for support that isn't there anymore. In moments of reflection where they realize that the person who once helped them process life is no longer part of the equation in the same way. These moments don't hurt sharply. They ache slowly. And slow aches are the ones that change people. Listen closely, because this is where their thinking shifts. They're no longer asking, "Why did this happen?" They're asking, "What did this mean?" That question marks a turning point. Meaning is heavier than emotion. Emotion passes. Meaning stays. They're starting to see that you weren't just part of their life's scenery, you were part of its structure. Don't scroll past this, because your soulmate is also recognizing something unsettling. They grew in your presence without realizing how much of that growth was connected to you. Not because you fixed them, but because you created an environment where growth felt possible. Without that environment, they're noticing friction. Old insecurities feel louder. Old avoidance patterns feel more tempting. That contrast is teaching them something they can't unlearn. Stay with this, because they're also confronting the fact that losing you wouldn't just remove comfort, it would remove accountability. You saw them clearly. You noticed when they were slipping into old habits. You challenged them without attacking. That kind of mirror is rare. Without it, it's easier to stay stagnant, and part of them knows that stagnation would cost them more than vulnerability ever did. Listen carefully, because your soulmate is now revisiting moments they once brushed off. Times when you spoke up gently. Times when you set boundaries. Times when you went quiet not to punish, but to protect yourself. They're seeing those moments differently now. What once felt inconvenient now feels significant. What once felt like pressure now feels like care they didn't fully appreciate. Don't miss this, because they're also realizing that you didn't threaten to leave to gain leverage. You stepped back because you were changing. Because you were choosing yourself. That realization shifts the narrative inside them. It removes the comfort of thinking, they'll always be there. And once that comfort is gone, value becomes clearer. Stay present, because this is where fear starts to creep in, not fear of loneliness, but fear of permanence. Fear that if they don't respond to this moment honestly, they may lose access to something that can't be replaced. Not you as a role, but you as a presence. And presence is irreplaceable. Listen closely, because your soulmate is also beginning to understand that love is not proven by feelings alone. Feelings existed. What's haunting them now is the question of follow-through. They're seeing that caring without choosing is still a choice. And that choice has consequences. Don't scroll away, because this realization is not making them spiral. It's making them sober. Sobriety is uncomfortable because it strips away fantasy. It forces people to see what actually is. And what actually is right now is that your absence has created a void they can't distract themselves out of. Stay with this, because they've tried. They've tried staying busy. They've tried focusing on other areas of life. They've tried convincing themselves that time will make this less relevant. But time is doing the opposite. Time is clarifying. It's showing them what lasts when novelty fades. Listen carefully, because your soulmate is also noticing how different this feels from past losses. Past losses felt sharp and dramatic. This feels steady and heavy. That difference matters. Sharp pain heals quickly. Heavy truth changes direction. Don't miss this, because they're also starting to imagine life milestones without you, not as a threat, but as a reality check. And those imagined futures feel flatter. Less grounded. Less supported. That doesn't mean life would end without you. It means it would be fundamentally different. And that difference is finally registering. Stay present, because your soulmate is also recognizing that you didn't just add joy, you added resilience. You helped them bounce back. You helped them make sense of chaos. Without that, setbacks feel harder. Decisions feel lonelier. That realization is humbling. Listen closely now, because humility is growing where defensiveness used to live. They're less focused on justifying the past and more focused on understanding it. Less focused on protecting their ego and more focused on facing truth. That shift is not temporary. Once humility enters, it changes how people respond to life permanently. Don't scroll, because this is where the realization deepens into responsibility. Responsibility doesn't mean obligation to fix everything. It means acknowledging impact. They're acknowledging that losing you would change their emotional ecosystem, their growth trajectory, their sense of partnership in life. Stay with this, because they're also seeing that you never tried to control them. You invited them. You made space. You offered connection without force. And now that that invitation isn't open in the same way, they're realizing how rare that dynamic was. Listen carefully, because this realization is also forcing them to confront their own patterns of delay. Delay felt safe. Delay felt neutral. Now delay feels risky. Risky not because you'll disappear out of spite, but because you're no longer waiting to be chosen. Don't miss this, because your soulmate is noticing your independence differently now. What once felt secure now feels distant. What once felt stable now feels conditional on effort. And that's not a bad thing. It's reality. Reality is what finally brings value into focus. Stay present, because they're also beginning to understand that losing you wouldn't just remove emotional closeness, it would remove a shared future they quietly assumed would always be possible. They didn't consciously plan it, but they held it as an option. And options feel invisible until they're gone. Listen closely, because this is the stage where internal questions turn sharper. What am I willing to risk? What am I willing to change? What kind of life do I want to live? These are not romantic questions. They're existential ones. And you are part of the answer whether they admit it yet or not. Don't scroll away, because the most important thing happening now is this: your soulmate is no longer minimizing the impact of your absence. They're allowing themselves to feel it fully. And feeling fully is what leads to honest decisions. Stay with this, because this doesn't mean they're about to rush back or make promises. It means they're moving out of denial. Denial keeps people comfortable. Acceptance forces movement. Listen carefully now, because your soulmate is also starting to understand that losing you would not just be something they adjust to, it would be something they carry. Carry into future relationships. Carry into moments where they compare without meaning to. Carry into realizations about what they let slip away. Don't miss this, because this understanding is not about punishing themselves. It's about respecting reality. Respecting that some people are not interchangeable. Some connections don't repeat. Stay present, because this realization is still forming. It hasn't reached action yet, but it has reached truth. And once truth is felt at this level, action becomes inevitable in one form or another. Listen closely, because the truth your soulmate is now living with is simple but heavy. Losing you would not just hurt, it would reshape who they are and how they move through life. And that kind of realization doesn't pass quietly. It sits. It weighs. And eventually, it demands an answer. This is where they are now. Not at the end. But far beyond the beginning. And that changes everything that comes next. Before you expect this realization to immediately turn into words, messages, or visible movement, stay here a little longer, because what your soulmate is experiencing now is the deep internal reshaping that happens after truth has settled but before courage fully rises. This is the stage where awareness stops being a thought and starts becoming an identity shift. They are no longer asking themselves whether losing you would matter. They know it would. What they are facing now is what that loss would say about them, their choices, and the life they are building. Stay present, because your soulmate is beginning to feel the weight of permanence. Not permanence in the sense that everything is already decided, but permanence in the sense that some doors, once closed, do not reopen the same way. They are realizing that people don't leave all at once, they leave in layers, emotionally first, then energetically, then practically. And they are noticing that you are no longer standing in the first layer. Listen carefully, because this is where the discomfort sharpens. Your soulmate is starting to see that your absence isn't dramatic enough to shock them into action, and that's exactly why it's effective. It's steady. It's consistent. It's calm. And that calm absence is forcing them to confront something they avoided for a long time. That you were choosing them, but you were also choosing yourself, and now self-choice has taken the lead. Don't scroll past this, because your soulmate is also realizing that the version of you who once waited, once hoped, once tried to understand everything for both of you, is no longer available. They see it in your tone. They feel it in your energy. You're not angry. You're not pleading. You're not explaining. And that quiet shift is louder than any confrontation could have been. Stay with this, because this is where fear transforms. It's no longer fear of conflict or vulnerability. It's fear of finality. Fear that if they don't step forward differently, the relationship won't end with an argument, it will end with acceptance. And acceptance is harder to reverse than anger. Listen closely, because your soulmate is now measuring moments differently. They're noticing how often your name crosses their mind in situations where it used to be automatic to share something with you. A thought. a joke, a frustration. And then comes the pause. The realization that sharing is no longer assumed. That pause is becoming a pattern. And patterns teach lessons. Don't miss this, because they're also recognizing that losing you wouldn't just remove emotional intimacy, it would remove the sense of being known. You didn't just hear them, you understood them. You remembered details. You noticed shifts. You connected dots they didn't even realize were there. Without that presence, they feel more alone in their inner world, even if they're surrounded by people. Stay present, because this realization is forcing them to face something uncomfortable, that being understood is not something you can demand, it's something you earn through consistency and openness. They're realizing they may have received understanding without fully offering the same depth in return. Listen carefully now, because this is where self-reflection deepens. Your soulmate is asking themselves whether they valued comfort over connection. Whether they chose familiarity over growth. Whether they relied on your patience instead of rising to meet your clarity. These questions are not gentle. They don't come with easy answers. Don't scroll away, because the answers matter. Not just for you, but for who they are becoming. They're realizing that losing you would leave behind more than an emotional gap. It would leave behind a question that echoes into the future: why didn't I act when I had the chance? Stay with this, because your soulmate is also starting to see how your presence shaped their emotional regulation. You grounded them. You helped them slow down. You gave them a place to land emotionally. Without that, stress feels heavier. Decisions feel less supported. They are noticing the cost of that absence in ways they didn't anticipate. Listen closely, because this is where regret begins to take shape, but it's not loud or self-pitying. It's thoughtful. It's reflective. It's the kind of regret that asks what could have been done differently, not what should have been avoided. Don't miss this, because regret at this stage isn't destructive. It's instructive. It's teaching them that presence should never be taken for granted, and that emotional safety is not guaranteed just because it once existed. Stay present, because your soulmate is also recognizing that you never asked them to be perfect. You asked them to be present. And that realization removes the excuse that fear once used. Fear told them they weren't ready. Now they're seeing that readiness wasn't about perfection, it was about participation. Listen carefully now, because this is where the internal dialogue changes tone. Instead of, "What if I fail?" it becomes, "What if I don't try?" Instead of, "What if it doesn't work?" it becomes, "What if I lose something irreplaceable by staying silent?" These questions are heavier, and they don't go away easily. Don't scroll, because this is the moment where value crystallizes. Value is not felt when something is abundant. It's felt when access becomes uncertain. Your soulmate is finally understanding that access to you was never guaranteed, it was a gift sustained by your choice to stay engaged. Stay with this, because they're also seeing that you didn't walk away impulsively. You didn't disappear dramatically. You simply stopped overextending. You stopped carrying what wasn't being shared. That kind of withdrawal signals self-respect, and self-respect changes the entire dynamic. Listen closely, because your soulmate is also noticing how different this feels from past separations or emotional distances. This doesn't feel like a phase. It feels like a shift. And shifts ask for response, not explanation. Don't miss this, because this is where responsibility becomes unavoidable. Responsibility not to fix everything, but to acknowledge impact. To recognize that your absence is not a punishment, it's a consequence of growth. Stay present, because they're also beginning to imagine future moments where your absence would be felt most strongly. Milestones. Challenges. Quiet evenings. They're not imagining these to torture themselves. They're imagining them because the future suddenly feels less certain without you in it. Listen carefully now, because this is not fantasy. This is foresight. And foresight is what pushes people to act differently. Don't scroll away, because the realization is now layered. Losing you would change their daily rhythm. Their emotional stability. Their sense of partnership. Their ability to feel deeply known. And that change would not fade quickly. It would integrate into who they become. Stay with this, because your soulmate is also realizing that if they lose you, it won't be because love wasn't there. It will be because action wasn't. And that distinction matters deeply to them now. Listen closely, because this understanding is not yet courage, but it is the soil where courage grows. Courage doesn't appear in denial. It appears in clarity. Don't miss this final truth of this stage, because it's the most important one. Your soulmate is no longer underestimating the cost of losing you. They are feeling it fully, honestly, and without distraction. And once someone truly feels that cost, they don't stay the same. They either rise to meet it, or they carry it forward as a lesson they'll never forget. This is where they are now. Not indifferent. Not unaware. But standing in the weight of what your absence would truly mean. And that weight is changing them. Before you assume this weight will automatically turn into immediate action, stay right here a little longer, because what your soulmate is moving through now is the slow, irreversible shift where realization becomes responsibility, and responsibility begins to demand a decision that can no longer be postponed without cost. This is not the phase of emotion anymore, it's the phase of reckoning with self-image, identity, and the kind of life they want to look back on without regret. Stay present, because your soulmate is starting to feel something deeper than fear or longing. They are feeling consequence. Not as punishment, but as truth. The truth that some losses don't explode loudly, they echo quietly for years. The truth that losing you wouldn't just be an emotional event, it would become part of their inner narrative, shaping how they approach future love, trust, and vulnerability. Listen closely, because they are beginning to see that you were not just someone who made life easier, you were someone who made life more honest. Around you, they couldn't hide as easily. They couldn't pretend they were fine when they weren't. They couldn't stay shallow for long. And now that you're no longer as present, they're noticing how easily they slip back into emotional autopilot with others. That realization is unsettling. Don't scroll past this, because your soulmate is also noticing how much emotional labor you carried without making it visible. You held space. You listened deeply. You stayed regulated when things got heavy. You offered stability without demanding credit. Now that you're not doing that work for them anymore, the absence feels like imbalance. They feel it in moments when they don't know who to talk to, who to trust, or how to process something without being misunderstood. Stay with this, because this is where appreciation turns into humility. Humility is different from guilt. Guilt says, I did something wrong. Humility says, I received something valuable that I didn't fully honor. That distinction matters, because humility opens the door to change, while guilt often shuts it. Listen carefully now, because your soulmate is also realizing that you never tried to control the connection. You didn't trap them. You didn't pressure them. You gave them freedom. And that freedom made it easy to underestimate what you brought. Now they're seeing that freedom was not lack of care, it was strength. Don't miss this, because they're also understanding that your absence is not a tactic. It's not a test. It's not manipulation. It's alignment. You aligned with your own needs, your own growth, your own boundaries. And alignment doesn't shout. It simply moves. Stay present, because this realization is changing how they interpret the past. Moments that once felt neutral now feel meaningful. Conversations they didn't take seriously now feel pivotal. Silences they ignored now feel loud. The past is reorganizing itself in their mind, not to create pain, but to create understanding. Listen closely, because they're also noticing how rare it is to find someone who offers emotional safety without dependency. You didn't need them to complete you. You chose them because you wanted connection, not because you feared being alone. That kind of choice is rare. And losing access to that kind of presence is not something they can replace easily. Don't scroll, because this is where the fear of losing you evolves. It's no longer fear of being alone. It's fear of settling for less awareness, less depth, less growth. They're realizing that life without you might be more comfortable in some ways, but it would also be smaller. Stay with this, because your soulmate is also beginning to question whether the life they're building aligns with the person they want to become. You represented growth. You represented evolution. You represented emotional honesty. Without you as a reference point, they feel the risk of drifting instead of developing. Listen carefully now, because they're also recognizing that losing you would not be something they simply move on from. It would become a lesson they carry into every future relationship. A comparison they didn't intend to make. A standard that quietly exists whether they want it to or not. Don't miss this, because this realization is stripping away their ability to minimize. They can no longer tell themselves that everything would be fine, that life would adjust, that they'd forget. They're seeing that forgetting is not the same as integrating, and unresolved understanding doesn't disappear, it resurfaces later. Stay present, because your soulmate is also noticing how much calmer you seem now. How grounded. How less reactive. And that calm is confronting. It shows them that you didn't leave in chaos, you left in clarity. And clarity is hard to argue with. Listen closely, because this is where accountability starts to form real weight. Accountability doesn't mean blame. It means ownership of impact. They're owning the fact that their hesitation, silence, or inconsistency played a role in creating distance. That ownership is not comfortable, but it is necessary. Don't scroll away, because they're also realizing something else. You didn't need them to change to be worthy. You changed because you outgrew the dynamic. That truth dismantles any remaining illusion that you were waiting for them to become ready. Stay with this, because your soulmate is now seeing that the version of you who stayed through uncertainty did so out of hope, not weakness. And the version of you who stepped back did so out of self-respect, not coldness. That reframing is powerful. Listen carefully now, because this is where the internal question becomes unavoidable: if I lose this person, can I live with how it happened? Not, can I survive? Not, will I find someone else? But, can I respect myself knowing I didn't rise to the moment? Don't miss this, because self-respect is now at stake. And when self-respect enters the conversation, things change. People don't like living with the version of themselves that avoided courage. Stay present, because your soulmate is also feeling the difference between temporary discomfort and long-term regret. Temporary discomfort comes from honesty. Long-term regret comes from silence. They're beginning to understand which one is heavier. Listen closely, because this is also where your absence becomes instructive rather than painful. It's teaching them without words. It's reflecting their choices back to them. It's showing them the cost of delay. Don't scroll, because this is the moment where realization turns from passive awareness into active pressure. Pressure not from you, not from circumstances, but from conscience. Conscience doesn't shout. It persists. Stay with this, because your soulmate is now imagining two futures, not in fantasy, but in clarity. One where they step forward honestly, regardless of outcome. One where they don't. And the difference between those futures feels stark. Listen carefully now, because they're realizing that losing you would not just change their life emotionally. It would change how they trust themselves. How they view courage. How they define love. Don't miss this final understanding of this stage, because it's crucial. Your soulmate is no longer unsure about your value. They're unsure about their willingness to meet it. And that uncertainty is no longer comfortable. Stay present, because this is the phase where decisions begin to form internally long before they are spoken aloud. This is where the weight becomes direction. This is where realization becomes a crossroads. And whatever happens next will come from this exact moment of truth, not from impulse, not from fear, but from a deep understanding of what losing you would truly mean. Before you expect a clear outcome to appear on the surface, stay with this moment just a little longer, because what your soulmate is moving through now is the final internal convergence where understanding, fear, responsibility, and desire all meet in one place. This is the stage where nothing new is being learned, but everything that has been learned is being weighed against the kind of person they want to be when they look back on this chapter of their life. And that weight is heavy, not because it's dramatic, but because it's honest. Stay present, because your soulmate is now feeling the difference between missing someone and realizing you mattered more than they allowed themselves to admit. Missing is emotional. Realizing someone mattered is existential. It changes how you see your past decisions, your present behavior, and your future priorities. They're no longer romanticizing what was lost. They're understanding what was at stake. Listen closely, because this is where the realization becomes personal. Not, I might miss them, but I will become a different person without them. That distinction is powerful. They're seeing that you were not an accessory to their life, you were a stabilizer. You helped regulate their emotional highs and lows. You brought perspective when they were reactive. You offered grounding when they were scattered. Losing that doesn't create chaos immediately, but it creates drift, and drift is dangerous because it happens slowly. Don't scroll past this, because your soulmate is also noticing something uncomfortable. They are less proud of themselves when they imagine a future where they never rose to meet this moment. Pride isn't about winning someone back. It's about knowing you acted in alignment with your values. They're realizing that silence protected comfort, but it didn't protect integrity. Stay with this, because they're also beginning to accept that you didn't leave because you stopped caring. You left because you started caring about yourself more. That truth is hard to sit with, because it removes the illusion that the distance was accidental or circumstantial. It places it firmly in the realm of consequence. Listen carefully now, because this is where comparison begins, not with other people, but with other versions of themselves. They're comparing who they were when you were present to who they feel themselves becoming without you. And that comparison isn't flattering. They feel less grounded, less motivated, less emotionally honest. That doesn't mean life is falling apart. It means something meaningful was lost. Don't miss this, because your soulmate is also realizing that you didn't just offer love, you offered reflection. You reflected their potential back to them. You believed in who they could be, not just who they were. Without that reflection, they feel smaller, not because they are smaller, but because no one is calling them upward in the same way. Stay present, because this realization is creating internal urgency, but not panic. It's a sober urgency. The kind that asks, if I don't act now, who do I become? That question doesn't allow procrastination to feel harmless anymore. Listen closely, because they're also noticing how your absence has changed their emotional landscape. Joy still exists. Life still moves. But depth feels muted. Conversations feel surface level. Connections feel easier but less nourishing. They're starting to understand that ease and fulfillment are not the same thing. Don't scroll away, because this is where the fear sharpens. Not fear of rejection, but fear of living a life that's emotionally convenient rather than meaningful. You represented meaning. Meaning asks more. Meaning requires presence. Meaning requires courage. Stay with this, because your soulmate is also confronting the idea that some people don't just pass through your life, they define eras. And losing someone like that doesn't just end a relationship, it ends a version of yourself. They're beginning to grieve that possibility. Listen carefully now, because grief at this stage isn't loud. It's reflective. It shows up as quiet moments where they realize how much you shaped their inner world. How often they became more thoughtful because of you. How often they paused because of you. That kind of influence doesn't disappear cleanly. Don't miss this, because they're also recognizing that you never asked them to be something they weren't capable of becoming. You asked them to show up. To choose. To be honest. Those were not unreasonable requests. They were invitations to maturity. Stay present, because this realization is dismantling one of their last defenses, the belief that timing was the real issue. They're seeing now that timing was not the barrier. Courage was. And courage can't be outsourced to time. Listen closely, because this is where responsibility becomes unavoidable. Responsibility not to guarantee an outcome, but to honor what was real. They're realizing that letting something real slip away without ever meeting it honestly would be a betrayal of themselves, not just of you. Don't scroll, because this is the stage where internal narratives collapse. The stories they told themselves to stay comfortable no longer hold up under scrutiny. They can't tell themselves you were asking for too much. They can't tell themselves it wasn't serious. They can't tell themselves it would have faded anyway. The truth is clearer now. Stay with this, because they're also noticing how much strength it took for you to step back without bitterness. Without drama. Without blame. That strength is intimidating, because it highlights their own avoidance. But it's also inspiring, because it shows them what self-respect looks like in practice. Listen carefully now, because your soulmate is also thinking about legacy. Not legacy in a grand sense, but in the personal sense. What kind of partner were they in this story? What kind of human did they show up as? Those questions linger, and they don't allow easy answers. Don't miss this, because this is where the realization moves from emotional to moral. Moral in the sense of right and wrong according to one's own values. They're asking themselves whether they lived up to what they believe about love, courage, and honesty. Stay present, because this is the moment where fear and integrity are in direct conflict. Fear says, protect yourself. Integrity says, be truthful. And your soulmate is feeling the pull of integrity more strongly than ever before. Listen closely, because this pull doesn't mean they're guaranteed to act the way you hope. It means they can no longer act the way they used to. Indifference is no longer possible. Silence is no longer neutral. Avoidance is no longer invisible. Don't scroll away, because this is where the realization becomes irreversible. Once someone understands that losing you would fundamentally change the quality of their life, they can't unknow that truth. They may resist it. They may delay. But it will stay with them. Stay with this, because your soulmate is also recognizing that even if life goes on, it won't feel the same. And that sameness matters. Humans adapt, but adaptation is not the same as fulfillment. Listen carefully now, because this is the moment where the future becomes heavier than the past. The past is already written. The future is still negotiable. And they're feeling the pressure of that choice. Don't miss this final truth of this stage, because it's essential. Your soulmate is no longer wondering if losing you would hurt. They know it would. They're now deciding whether they're willing to let that hurt become part of who they are, or whether they're willing to risk vulnerability to change the outcome. Stay present, because this decision will not be made lightly. It's being shaped by everything they've learned, everything they've avoided, and everything they now understand about your value. This is the final internal turning point. Not because it guarantees action, but because it removes the comfort of not choosing. And once that comfort is gone, something has to give. That is where your soulmate stands now. At the edge of a decision that will define not just this
Take a quiet
connection,
breath here
but how
because
they live with
this final
themselves
moment is
going
not
forward.
about pushing an
And
outcome.
that makes this
It's
moment
about
more
understanding
powerful
where
than it
everything now
appears.
stands. Your soulmate is no longer unaware, no longer minimizing, and no longer comfortable pretending that losing you would be something they could simply move past. That awareness has settled into them deeply, and it will continue to influence their choices whether they act immediately or not. You don't need to chase clarity anymore because clarity has already arrived on the inside of the person who once avoided it. What happens next will come from truth, not confusion. Your role now is remain grounded in who you have become, not to shrink yourself to be chosen, and not to wait in uncertainty. Trust that anything meant to stay in your life will meet you at the level you stand at now. If this message helped you see things more clarity or brought you sense of calm understanding, take a moment to like it so it can reach others who need it. So share it with someone who might be carrying the same quiet question, and subscribe for more messages that speak honestly, gently, and deeply to the heart. Thank you.